Welcome to Extra Take. Today I will be discussing the history behind the concept of gods in various human cultures, and I will be arguing that the patterns and universality of the concepts of God demonstrates that all of them, even the popular ones we believe in today, are nothing more than man-made creations. Every culture around the world created their own mythology around the history of their kind and the formation of Earth. Devoid of the tools necessary to do scientific inquiry and investigate the cause, the origin, the working parts of a system, human beings will still search for an explanation. The rivers, the mountains, the sea, the plants, the animals, these were all viewed as having been created with intent. It is a natural human instinct. This is a good explanation for the universality of gods and goddesses in all different cultures throughout history. But there was never a uniform archetype for the gods. Sometimes there was one, sometimes there were many. Sometimes they took on the form of people, sometimes animals. Sometimes they were complete abstractions. It was also viewed that a god or goddess, or several of them, continued to shape the world in their time. This is still done today. And these gods and goddesses, although supernatural, are frequently anthropomorphized. Why should something that has supernatural powers over the elements or created the entire universe take on the form of a person? That's the opposite of imaginative to me. It actually seems pretty lazy. It's because we created the gods in our image. We do this because it comes natural. I've said this before, but we tend to view the world through the lens of our own experience. We anthropomorphized the world, and to me, that is what the beginning of religion may have been in some places. We looked out at the world and thought, why do the things here exist? Where did they come from? Our inclination is that something is behind all of this. But because we are also selfish and egotistic, we are even more apt to believe that someone is behind all of it. There's the personification and the belief that something intelligent did all of this. Mythologies involving gods are also always centered around the culture that invented them. Why did Noah not send out an albatross to look for dry land after the flood? The albatross is a sea-going bird. There wouldn't have been a better choice to scour a world covered in ocean. After all, every animal was on that ark. It's because the people who made that story up had no idea that albatrosses exist. If the people who wrote that story knew that any other landmass besides Africa and Eurasia exists, they would have never have said something so stupid as 2 of every animal were on the ark. Because it's obviously impossible that kangaroos hopped to the Middle East from Australia, or that llamas swam across the Atlantic Ocean to get there. The extinct religions and mythologies of the world commonly included elements of nature in their stories as well, but always of animals and things that they knew existed. Again, this is lazy and egotistic. Of course the gods live on Mount Olympus. It's right there, and I'm right here, and the gods watch over me because I'm a big deal. Polytheistic cultures created gods for everything. Agriculture, wine, music, fire, volcanoes, lightning, the ocean, weather. Everything had a humanoid god or goddess as the causal agent behind it. Then a few cultures decided, no, actually, there's only one god behind all of it. But the gods so often take the form of people. We think we are special. And because we are special, then the gods or goddesses who created the universe must take after us. And so we think they do. If Jesus wanted to convince us he was divine, then taking the form of a person was maybe the worst way to do it. Countless people have claimed to be divine, but those people were nothing but flesh and blood. The Egyptians actually got this right. If Horus, the Egyptian god with the body of a man, but the head of a falcon appeared on this earth, I would admit, okay, something unexplainable is going on here. But who knows? China will probably start doing human-animal hybrids in a few years. That certainly won't make those things divine. There are more patterns in the way gods were developed over the globe. These patterns further reveal to me that gods are man-made ideas. In cultures where the ecosystem was rich, they tended to be polytheistic. Why? Well, remember, we crave an explanation for the things around us. Before we knew that nature operates under determinable laws, it was thought that everything was guided or created by the hand of a god. In a rich ecosystem where there is much going on, you develop lots of gods and goddesses to explain all of the different things around you. Desert-dwelling civilizations the world over, I'm not just talking about in the Middle East, where the Abrahamic religions were centered, were overwhelmingly monotheistic. In a land of scarcity, there isn't nearly as much explanation required, and a single god can take credit for the mostly nothingness around you. The nature of these gods in these different environments is also strikingly different, and again, reflective of the people who lived there, who made their gods like them. If you live in a rainforest, it may be hard from time to time, but you have what you need. There is a rich abundance of resources to be had. Rainforest cultures were much less militant and more socialist in a sense. They had no problem sharing what they owned or could produce. And the gods of these cultures reflect that. The gods of polytheistic cultures are hardly ever interventionist. Even in rainforest cultures that were monotheistic, their god did not intervene. He or she was simply the explanation for where their world came from. This is a stark contrast to the desert gods of monotheistic cultures. Living in a desert climate is brutal, especially thousands of years ago. You do not share. If you do, you will not survive. You do not bring in outsiders. You don't have the resources for that. Desert-dwelling cultures have historically been highly militant and combative. When you think of the desert cultures of the past, Egypt, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Hittites, these were all remembered as conquerors. It can be a winner-take-all, conflict-ridden style of life. And guess what? Their gods reflect that. Muhammad was a military leader, and unlike Moses or King David, we know for a fact that he certainly existed. After Muhammad's death, his successors continued to conquer an enormous territory, rivaling that of Rome's. I'm not well versed in the Quran, but I am in the Old Testament, so we'll switch to there. The way in which war, genocide, slavery, and conquering of people is so common in the Old Testament is shocking. And these things were either sponsored by or directly commanded by their God. 1 Samuel 15:3 reads, "Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." Deuteronomy 19 begins with, "When the Lord your God has destroyed the nations whose land he is giving you." It goes on, but we can stop there to point out that what's happening here is they are justifying invading an area and stealing it from people who already live there by saying their God commanded it. Again, this is brutal, winner-take-all culture and environment, and you justify your actions by inventing a God who told you to do it. Then in Deuteronomy 20, God explains what you do when you conquer a city. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. So right here, we can see that the best case scenario is that everyone in the city is forced into slavery. Worst case scenario goes like this. If they refuse to make peace, lay siege to that city. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all of the men in it. As for the women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the city, you may take these as plunder for yourselves. But this is only for cities that were outside the area given to the Israelites. It goes on further to say that what you do with cities inside of the Promised Land is you do not leave alive anything that breathes. In Numbers 31, Moses leads a campaign against the Midianites, whereby God then commanded Moses' army to kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. This is shocking cruelty, and it is unjustifiable in any context, much the way that a parent can do better than kill their child if it won't listen to them. A supernatural God can do better things than command that people be killed or enslaved for much the same. But people aren't so graceful. God was said to sponsor these things for one of two reasons as I see this. One would be to wash away the sins of the people who committed these unspeakable atrocities, if these stories are true. What's nice is there's no reason to think that these specific ones are. Thank God. The other reason you create a God who sponsors or demands these things, and this sounds like the more likely reason to me, is that they created God to instill fear into people. Do as I say or else. No rational, sane, or just not stubborn person would want to believe in a God that is so hideous. This is completely inconsistent with the God we are told exists. You can't love the world but destroy its people for not knowing what else to do with them. In the next video, I will be talking about how science has buried the need for gods to explain how the natural world works. I will also explain how, logically, the God of the three major religions of the world cannot exist. Thanks for watching.